He's one of the most recognizable faces on American television. Millions see him smile every day. But few know he once cried himself to sleep inside a car. There's a man who turned laughter into an empire. Tailored suits, viral motivation clips, a billion-dollar brand. But behind the cameras and the charisma lies a story built on poverty, silence, and years spent completely alone. How does a man go from washing in gas station sinks to commanding the biggest stages in the world? What does it cost to chase a dream so big it tears your life apart? And when the whole world is finally watching, what happens if you make one mistake? Before we answer that, we need to go back to the boy who wrote one line on a piece of paper. I want to be on TV. Broderick Stephen Harvey was born in 1957 in Welch, West Virginia, a place where the mountains were steep, the air was thick with coal dust, and the future was usually determined by how much rock you could shovel. It was a hard world, built on the backs of men like Jesse Harvey. Steve's father, Jesse, was a coal miner. He was a man of iron will and few words. He spent his days deep in the earth, breathing in the darkness so his family could live in the light. Jesse did not make millions. He made $5 a day, but he taught Steve the currency of manhood. He taught him that you show up, you do the work, you do not complain. His mother, Eloise, was the softness to Jesse's steel. She was a Sunday school teacher who filled the house with gospel and gratitude. She taught Steve to pray, a lesson that would one day save his life when he had nothing left but a prayer. But while the home was filled with love, the world outside was a battlefield for young Steve. And his enemy was not poverty or racism, although those were ever-present shadows. His greatest enemy lived in his own throat. Steve Harvey, the man known for his quick wit and lightning-fast comebacks, was born with a severe, debilitating stutter. Imagine having a mind that moves at 100 miles an hour, filled with jokes, observations, and brilliance, but a mouth that cannot get past the first syllable. For young Steve, speaking was torture. Every sentence was a minefield. Words like hello or present were mountains he had to climb while other kids watched and waited. He became a master of silence. He learned to listen. He learned to watch people's faces, to read their body language. He developed the observational skills of a hawk, not because he wanted to be a comedian, but because he was trying to survive without speaking. But the cruelty of childhood is sharp. The neighborhood kids had a nickname for him, Va 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 Voom. They laughed when he tried to say vanilla at the deli counter. The shame was a heavy coat he wore everywhere. And then there was the incident that almost crushed his spirit entirely. The dream killer. In the 6th grade, his teacher assigned the class a simple task. Write down what you want to be when you grow up. Most of the boys in the neighborhood wrote policeman, fireman, or farmer. Practical dreams. Safe dreams. But Steve felt something different. Even then, locked behind the stutter, he felt a pull toward the screen. He had watched the few variety shows available on their small television set, mesmerized by the people who could make a room full of strangers laugh. So, with a trembling hand, he wrote, I want to be on TV. When the teacher called him up to the front of the class, it was not to praise his ambition. It was to make an example of him. She looked at the paper, then at him, and then at the class. Why would you write something like this? She asked, her voice dripping with condescension. Do you know anyone on TV? Do you have family in Hollywood? You are a colored boy from West Virginia who cannot even talk. Who do you think you are? The class erupted in laughter. It was the kind of laughter that stays with you for 50 years. It was a public execution of a dream. She told him to take the paper home and rewrite it with something realistic. Broken, Steve went home. But he did not rewrite it. He showed it to his father. Jesse Harvey looked at the paper, then at his son's tear-streaked face. He did not laugh. He did not tell him to be a miner. He said, "Put that paper in your drawer, and every morning you wake up, you look at it. Don't you let nobody tell you what you can't be." That paper stayed in the drawer, but the road to the screen was nowhere in sight. The family eventually moved to Cleveland, Ohio, trading the coal mines for the steel mills. But the change in scenery did not change Steve's luck. The stutter eventually faded, conquered by a deli counter clerk who forced him to slow down and breathe. But the directionlessness of his life took over. He tried college at Kent State and flunked out. He tried working at the Ford assembly line, putting in screws on an assembly belt, day after day. A robot made of flesh. He was fired. He sold insurance. He sold carpet. He was a mailman. By his mid-20s, Steve Harvey was not a star. He was a drifter, a young man with a magnetic personality but zero purpose. He was the funny guy at the barber shop, the one who could crack up the break room, but he was going nowhere. He was married, trying to support a family, but feeling the crushing weight of mediocrity. He was 27 years old. In the entertainment world, that is ancient to start a career. Most prodigies are discovered at 15 or 18. Steve was pushing 30, working odd jobs, his hands calloused like his father's, but his heart empty. He did not know it yet, but he was standing on the edge of a cliff. The jump was coming. But before he could jump, he had to find the stage. And finding the stage would cost him everything he had. It started with a dare, a simple suggestion from a friend. "You're funny. You should try stand-up." Steve had never been in a comedy club in his life. He did not know how to write a set. He did not know about timing or hecklers. But he had that paper in his drawer. And he had a lifetime of observations stored up from the years he spent in silence. He walked onto the stage at Hilarity's Comedy Club in Cleveland. The lights hit him, and for the first time in his life, the stutter did not matter. The poverty did not matter. The teacher who said he was nothing did not matter. He grabbed the mic, and he went to work. They say the road to hell is paved with good intentions. But the road to Hollywood? That is often paved with hunger. In October 1985, Steve Harvey made the decision that would shatter his life before it rebuilt it. He won an amateur night. He tasted the applause. And in a moment of absolute insanity, or perhaps destiny, he quit his job. He had a wife. He had twin daughters. He had responsibilities. But he also had a fire in his belly that whispered, "This is it." He walked away from the safety of a paycheck to chase a dream that promised him nothing. And almost immediately, the world punished him for his arrogance. The comedy gigs were sporadic. The pay was insulting. $50 here, $25 there. It was not enough to keep the lights on, let alone support a family. The tension at home became unbearable. Arguments over money turned into silence, and silence turned into separation. His marriage collapsed under the weight of his ambition. Suddenly, Steve Harvey was alone. No wife, no kids, no house. All he had was a small bag of clothes and a 1976 Ford Tempo. Homelessness is not a sudden event. It is a slow erosion of dignity. It started with a week in a motel he could not afford. Then a night in the car. Then 2. Then it became his life for 3 agonizing years. 1986, 1987, 1988. While the rest of the world was watching The Cosby Show and listening to Michael Jackson, Steve Harvey was living in a metal box. The Ford Tempo became his bedroom, his kitchen, and his closet. He developed a system for survival, a routine of humiliation. He bought an igloo cooler and placed it in the back seat. That was his refrigerator. He would fill it with bologna, water, and ice. If he got a gig, he ate fast food. If he did not, he ate a bologna sandwich. Hygiene became a strategic operation. He knew which gas stations had single-occupancy bathrooms where he could lock the door. He would strip down, wash his armpits and groin with harsh pink soap from the dispenser, and dry himself with rough paper towels. He would shave in the rearview mirror, praying no one would knock on the window. And then he would put on a suit. This is the paradox that nearly broke his mind. Every night, he had to walk onto a stage looking like a success. He had to project confidence. He had to be Steve Harvey, the funny man. He would make 200 people laugh until their sides hurt, bathing in their adoration for 45 minutes. But when the show ended and the audience went home to their warm beds, Steve walked out the back door, got into his freezing car, drove to a dark corner of a rest stop, and reclined the seat. The silence that followed the applause was deafening. He was a ghost on the highway. He took gigs anywhere. Dives in Florida. Honky-tonks in Tennessee. If they had a microphone and $10, he was there. There was one night that stands out in the chronicle of his suffering. A gig in Florida. He had driven for hours on fumes, stealing gas by filling up and driving off because he had literally 0 cents in his pocket. He arrived at the club hungry, tired, and desperate. He did the show. He killed. The crowd loved him. Afterward, he went to the promoter to get his money. He needed that money to eat. He needed it to get to the next town. The promoter looked at him and said, "I can't pay you tonight. Come back next week." Steve stood there, the expensive suit hanging loosely on his frame, his stomach twisting in knots. He could not scream. He could not fight. He just nodded, walked out to the Ford Tempo, and cried. He later recalled, "I sat in that car and I cried so hard I couldn't breathe. I said, 'God, if you're real, you gotta get me out of this. I can't do this no more. I'm trying to be somebody. Why is it so hard?'" It was the lowest valley, a dark night of the soul where the temptation to quit was seductive and sweet. He could go back to the factory. He could beg for his old job back. He could admit the teacher was right, that a boy from West Virginia had no business dreaming this big. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the memory of his father's stoicism. Maybe it was the paper in the drawer. Or maybe it was the realization that he had already lost so much. He could not afford to stop now. The only way out was through. He kept driving. 3 years of winters where the car turned into an icebox. 3 years of summers where it became an oven. He stole fuel. He survived on the kindness of strangers and the sheer refusal to die. He was refining his craft in the fires of adversity. The jokes became sharper. His observation of human nature became deeper. He was not just telling jokes anymore. He was preaching survival. When he spoke about pain on stage, the audience laughed, but they also felt it. They connected with him because he was not looking down on them from a pedestal. He was looking up at them from the bottom. And then, in late 1989, the phone rang. It was not a family member. It was not a bill collector. It was a casting director from a show called Showtime at the Apollo. They were looking for a host. Steve did not have money for a plane ticket to New York. He did not have money for a cab. But he knew, with a terrifying certainty, that this was the door. If he missed this, he would die in that Ford Tempo. He borrowed money. He begged. He made it to New York. He walked onto the Apollo stage, the toughest room in the world, where legends were born and mediocrity was booed off the stage in seconds. He looked at the crowd. The crowd looked at him. He took a breath. And for the first time in 3 years, the Ford Tempo felt 1,000,000 miles away. The homeless man was about to become the king. Harlem, New York, 125th Street, the Apollo Theater. In the comedy world, this building is not just a venue. It is a gladiator pit. It is hallowed ground where legends like Richard Pryor and Moms Mabley stood. But it is also a graveyard where weak careers go to die. The audience at the Apollo does not politely clap. If they do not like you, they boo you. They scream at you. They summon the Sandman to literally sweep you off the stage in disgrace. In 1993, Steve Harvey stepped into this lion's den. He was not just a comic looking for a set. He was auditioning to succeed Mark Curry as the host. To be the host of Showtime at the Apollo meant you were not just the talent. You were the ringmaster. You had to control the crowd, the band, and the chaos. He walked out. The suit was sharp, a remnant of his desire to project dignity even when he had none. He grabbed the mic, and for the first time, the pain of the Ford Tempo years transmuted into power. He controlled the room with an iron grip. He roasted the hecklers. He flirted with the women in the front row. He was not asking for their permission to be there. He was telling them he belonged. He got the job. And for 7 years, Steve Harvey was the face of black comedy in America. The Apollo gave him steady money, the first he had seen in decades. The car was gone, replaced by a home. But Steve knew that in Hollywood, hosting was silver, but sitcoms were gold. In 1996, the WB network took a chance on him, The Steve Harvey Show. It was a simple premise. A former funk legend named Steve Hightower becomes a high school music teacher on Chicago's West Side. It was not just a show, it was a cultural anchor. For 6 seasons, Steve Harvey and his co-star, Cedric the Entertainer, brought authentic, rhythm-filled humor to millions of living rooms. While Friends and Seinfeld dominated the mainstream ratings, The Steve Harvey Show was an absolute juggernaut in African-American households. Steve was finally somebody. He had the TV show, he had the money, he had the recognition, but he was not satisfied. He looked at the landscape of comedy and saw a void. Rock stars filled arenas, rappers filled stadiums, but comedians? Comedians played clubs and theaters. Steve Harvey wanted to change the math. 1997. The concept was audacious. Take the 4 biggest voices in comedy. Steve Harvey, the master of ceremonies, DL. Hewley, the sharp-tongued political observer, Cedric the Entertainer, the physical, joyful dancer, and Bernie Mac, the fearless, aggressive truth-teller, and put them on a tour. But not a club tour, an arena tour. Promoters laughed. They said, "Comedy doesn't work in a basketball arena. People can't see your face. The sound will get lost." Steve Harvey and his partners bet on themselves. They called it the Kings of Comedy. It did not just work. It exploded. It became the highest-grossing comedy tour in history. They were not just selling jokes, they were selling an event. It was a family reunion, a church service, and a rock concert rolled into one. Steve was the glue. As the host and the closer, he wore suits that cost more than the cars he used to sleep in. Canary yellow, electric blue, oversized and flowing. He lit cigars on stage. He held the microphone like a scepter. When Spike Lee filmed the tour for a documentary in 2000, it immortalized them. Steve's set was not about politics or abstract concepts. It was about men and women. It was about the church. It was about growing up poor. He took the trauma of his past and spun it into gold. One of his most famous bits from that era involved the old-school music versus the new school rap. It was not just funny. It was a masterclass in reading the room. He had 20,000 people in the palm of his hand. Steve Harvey had reached the mountaintop. He was a king. The Ford Tempo was a distant nightmare, a story he told to keep himself humble. He had conquered poverty. He had conquered obscurity. But as the tour ended and the lights of the arena faded, Steve Harvey was about to learn a brutal lesson. The climb to the top is hard, but staying there? Staying there requires a different kind of fight. The 2000s were coming, and with them, a shift in the culture that would force Steve to reinvent himself or perish. The sitcom was ending. The tour was over, and the king was about to face a midlife crisis that would threaten to tear his newfound empire apart. He had the money, but he was about to lose his way. In the entertainment industry, you are allowed one act. If you are lucky, you get a second. Almost no one gets a third. By the mid-2000s, Steve Harvey was wealthy, famous, and respected. But he was also boxed in. He was the urban comic, the king of comedy. Hollywood saw him as a niche asset, great for a specific demographic, but not a face that could sell soap to housewives in Middle America. The sitcom The Steve Harvey Show ended in 2002. The Kings of Comedy tour had run its course. For many comedians, this is the beginning of the slide into obscurity, playing smaller venues, reminiscing about the glory days. But Steve Harvey possesses an instinct that separates the rich from the wealthy. He knows when the wind is changing. He realized that stand-up comedy, the very thing that saved him from the Ford Tempo, was now limiting him. The road was grueling. The lifestyle was hard. And deep down, he knew he had more to offer than just punchlines. He wanted to speak to people, not just at them. His first pivot was radio, the Steve Harvey Morning Show. Radio is intimate. There is no stage to hide behind. It was here, in the early mornings, that a new Steve Harvey began to emerge. He was not just telling jokes. He was giving advice. He was talking about relationships, faith, and struggle. He noticed something fascinating. When the phone lines lit up, it was not men calling to talk sports. It was women, thousands of women, asking about their husbands, their boyfriends, their sons. They were asking him, a man with 2 failed marriages, how men think. Instead of dismissing them, Steve listened. And then he answered with the blunt, unvarnished truth that only a man who had lived a rough life could provide. One day, a publisher heard these segments and said, "There's a book in this." Steve laughed. "I am not an author," he said. "I barely passed English." But the check cleared, and he sat down to dictate his thoughts. The result was, act like a lady, think like a man. It was not just a book. It was a cultural nuclear bomb. Released in 2009, it did not just hit the New York Times bestseller list. It stayed there for 64 weeks. It was translated into 30 languages. It was adapted into 2 blockbuster movies. Overnight, Steve Harvey transformed from a comedian to a guru. He was no longer just the funny guy. He was the wise uncle, the relationship expert. He had unlocked a demographic that Hollywood had told him he could never reach. Women of all races, all ages, all backgrounds. This success gave him the leverage to make his biggest gamble yet. In 2010, the producers of Family Feud were desperate. The show was a dinosaur. It had been on air for decades, cycled through hosts, and was on the verge of cancellation. Ratings were dead. It was boring. They called Steve. Steve's agents told him not to do it. "Game shows are where careers go to die," they said. "You are a movie star now. You are a best-selling author. Why would you want to host a dusty old game show?" Steve saw something they did not. He saw a stage where he did not have to follow a script. He took the job, but he had one condition. I am going to do it my way. Before Steve, Family Feud was polite. Hosts smiled and moved the game along. Steve turned the show into a stand-up special. When a contestant gave a ridiculous answer, Steve did not just say, "Survey says." He stopped the show. He roasted them. He looked directly into the camera, breaking the fourth wall, sharing a silent moment of confusion with the audience at home. He made the host the star of the show. The result? The ratings did not just improve, they quadrupled. Family Feud became the #1 syndicated show on television, beating Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy! Clips of Steve's reactions went viral on YouTube, reaching millions of young people who had never even heard of the kings of comedy. He was now everywhere. He had the radio show in the morning, the talk show Steve Harvey in the afternoon, and Family Feud at night. He was the hardest-working man in show business. He changed his look to match his new empire. The high-top fade was shaved off, revealing a bald head that screamed, "Business!" The baggy zoot suits were replaced by custom-cut silks and wools. He looked like a CEO. He looked like money. By 2015, Steve Harvey was untouchable. He was a global brand. He had successfully crossed over, reinvented himself, and built a fortune that made the coal mines of West Virginia feel like another lifetime. But the higher you climb, the thinner the air gets, and the more people are watching, waiting for you to fall. Steve had conquered poverty. He had conquered the industry. But he was about to face a test that no amount of money could fix. He was about to make a mistake on the biggest stage in the universe, literally, and the world would not be forgiving. December 20th, 2015. Las Vegas. Steve Harvey stands on a stage watched by nearly 500 million people worldwide. This was supposed to be his victory lap. He had conquered comedy, radio, daytime talk, and game shows. Hosting the Miss Universe pageant was the jewel in the crown, a global gig that solidified his status as the ultimate master of ceremonies. The night had gone perfectly. He was charming, funny, and in command. We reach the final moment. Two women stand before him, Miss Colombia and Miss Philippines. The atmosphere is electric. Steve holds a small white card. He looks at it. He looks at the camera. And he says the words that would ring in his ears for the rest of his life. And the new Miss Universe is Miss Colombia. In the control booth, panic erupted. "You read the wrong name! You read the wrong name!" Steve later described this moment as a death sentence. He had two choices. He could let the show end, let the broadcast cut to black, and fix it backstage. It would have saved his dignity. It would have saved him from public execution. But Steve Harvey, the son of a coal miner, the man who learned integrity in the hard streets of Cleveland, knew he could not do that. He had to walk back out there. "I have to apologize," he said. The gasp from the audience was audible. It was a visceral sound of shock. The first runner-up is Miss Colombia. The camera cuts to Miss Philippines, confused. The camera cuts to Miss Colombia, devastated. The crown is physically removed from one head and placed on another. It was the most excruciating 4 minutes of live television in history. The backlash was nuclear. Steve did not just get mocked, he was hunted. He received death threats. People burned effigies of him in the streets of Colombia. The internet, a beast he had used to build his fame, turned on him with jagged teeth. For 48 hours, he was the most hated man on the planet. The joke of the world. He went back to his hotel room and sat in the dark. It felt like the Ford Tempo days all over again. The isolation. The feeling that everything he built was crumbling because of one mistake. He looked at the card again. The font was small, the layout confusing, but he refused to blame the card publicly. "I own it," he said. "I am the man on the mic." Most careers would have ended there. The shame is usually too toxic to survive. But Steve Harvey did something remarkable. He did not hide. Within weeks, he was laughing about it. He made a Super Bowl commercial mocking himself. He invited Miss Columbia onto his talk show for a tearful, honest reconciliation. He turned the tragedy into a masterclass in accountability. He survived. In fact, Miss Universe signed him to a multi-year contract to come back. They knew that despite the error, the world was watching him. But the armor had been chinked, and 2 years later, another crack appeared. In 2017, a confidential internal memo Steve sent to the staff of his Chicago talk show was leaked to the press. The tone was harsh. It was direct. "There will be no meetings in my dressing room, no popping in. Do not approach me while I am in the makeup chair. Do not wait in the hallway to speak to me. I want all the ambushing to stop now. That is my policy." The media went into a frenzy. They painted him as a diva, a tyrant, the man of the people who had forgotten where he came from. "He thinks he is too good to talk to his own staff," the headlines screamed. But for Steve, it was not about arrogance. It was about survival. He was shooting multiple shows a day. He was flying between cities. Every moment of his life was scheduled, demanded, and consumed by others. The dressing room was the only place where he could sit in silence, pray, and recharge before giving his energy to millions of people again. He defended the memo. "I don't apologize," he told reporters. "I needed boundaries. I was being eaten alive." But the damage to his reputation was real. The friendly uncle image was tarnished. It was a reminder that the higher you go, the more people expect to own a piece of you. And when you try to reclaim that piece, they call you a villain. These two events, the Miss Universe mistake and the memo scandal, revealed the brutal reality of modern fame. You can inspire millions for decades. You can feed families. You can build schools. But the moment you slip, the world is ready to bury you. Steve Harvey stood at a crossroads again. The industry was whispering that his time was up, that he was overexposed, that the magic was gone. But they forgot who they were dealing with. They forgot about the stutter. They forgot about the Ford Tempo. You cannot break a man who has already been broken and rebuilt himself stronger. Instead of retreating, Steve did what he always does. He pivoted. If the American media wanted to tear him down, he would look beyond America. He would look to his faith. And he would look to a new role, the philosopher. He was about to deliver a message that would eclipse every joke he ever told. He was about to talk about the jump. There is a cruel irony in the life of Steve Harvey. Here was the man who wrote the book on relationships. The man millions of women turned to for advice on how to find love, keep a man, and build a happy home. And yet, for the first half of his life, his own home was a disaster zone. Success is a jealous mistress. She demands all of your time, all of your energy, and usually, she demands the people you love as a sacrifice. Steve's first marriage to Marcia Harvey began before the fame, back when he was selling insurance in Ohio. They had twin daughters, Brandy and Carly, and a son, Broderick. They were a normal family. But when Steve made the decision to chase comedy, when he chose the road, the clubs, and the Ford Tempo, he did not just leave a job, he left them. He justified it to himself. He told himself he was doing it for them. "I am going to make it big, so you never have to worry," he would say. "But children do not want a check. They want their father. The marriage collapsed in 1994. The distance was too great. The poverty of the early years had eroded the foundation. Steve was finally rising in the comedy world, but he was doing it alone. The guilt of leaving his children behind became a shadow that followed him onto every stage. He later admitted, "I was trying to build a future for them, but I missed their past." Then came the second marriage to Mary Shackelford. This was the union that spanned his rise to superstardom, the Kings of Comedy era, the sitcom era. But as his star rose, the volatility at home exploded. It was a relationship that ended in a firestorm. The divorce in 2005 was not quiet. It was a public war. Accusations flew. Lawsuits were filed. For a man who built his brand on dignity and class, the tabloid headlines were a humiliation. He was being painted as a villain in his own life. He lost millions. But more than money, he lost his peace. He was the king of comedy, making 20,000 people laugh a night. But he would go back to a hotel room and sit in total silence, wondering why he was so good at understanding crowds, but so bad at understanding his own heart. I got to a point where I had all the money, all the suits, all the cars, and I was miserable. I was spiritually bankrupt. But the deepest wound was the estrangement from his daughters. For years, there was a wall of ice between Steve and the twins. They had watched him leave. They had watched him start new families. They did not see a provider. They saw a phantom. The reconciliation is one of the most powerful, unscripted moments of his life. It did not happen in a courtroom or a therapist's office. It happened with a conversation where Steve had to do the hardest thing a father can do: drop the ego. He looked them in the eyes and said, "I'm sorry." He did not make excuses about the business. He did not talk about the money he sent. He simply acknowledged the pain his absence had caused. Brandy and Carly, now grown women, forgave him. They realized that the man they thought had abandoned them was actually a man who had nearly killed himself, trying to give them a world he never had. The healing of that bond was the first step in Steve's true emotional recovery. But he was still missing a partner. He was a two-time divorcee with a reputation for baggage. He had resigned himself to being alone. And then, destiny circled back. The story sounds like a movie script, but it is true. In 1990, at a comedy club in Memphis, Steve was on stage. He was struggling, still unknown. He looked out into the audience and saw a woman walking to her seat. She was stunning. He literally stopped the show. He went silent. He looked at her and said into the microphone, "I don't know who you are, but I'm going to marry you one day." Her name was Marjorie. They dated briefly, but life pulled them apart. He was broke. She had her own life. They lost touch. 15 years later, in 2005, after his second divorce left him broken, his bodyguard handed him a phone. "I think you need to talk to her," he said. It was Marjorie. They reconnected. And this time, Steve was ready. Not just financially, but emotionally. Marjorie did not need his money. She needed a man who was present. She became the matriarch, the stabilizer. She took his blended family, his children, her children, and forced them to become one unit. She saved him. Marjorie brought order to the chaos. She taught him that you cannot just be a father who signs checks. You have to be a father who shows up. The transformation was visible. The hard edge of the Kings of Comedy era softened. The anger from the divorce years evaporated. Steve Harvey, the man who spent decades running from the ghosts of poverty and the shame of the stutter, finally stopped running. He realized that the greatest title he ever earned was not king or host or best-selling author. It was dad and grandpa. But with his private life finally secured, Steve felt a shift in his spirit. He had conquered the world. He had healed his home. Now, he wanted to leave something behind that was not just entertainment. He wanted to leave a map for others. He began to talk less about jokes and more about God. He began to talk about the philosophy that had carried him through the Ford Tempo years. He was ready to deliver his final, most powerful sermon. The philosophy of the jump. In 2016, something unexpected happened. Steve Harvey went viral. Not for a joke, not for a reaction shot, not for a mistake. He went viral for a sermon. It happened during a commercial break on Family Feud. The cameras were technically off, but someone was recording. Steve looked at the audience, feeling a heaviness in the room, and decided to share the philosophy that had saved his life. He called it the jump. God has a wonderful life for you, he told them. But you cannot have that life unless you jump. You have to jump. If you don't jump, your parachute will never open. You'll be safe. You'll be cool, but you'll never soar. The video was viewed over 100 million times in a week. It resonated because it was not a celebrity giving hollow advice. It was a man with scars telling you how he got them. When Steve Harvey talks about the parachute, he is not speaking metaphorically. He is talking about 1985. He is talking about the Ford Tempo. He is talking about the moment he quit the factory, leaving behind the safety of a steady paycheck to throw himself into the abyss of the unknown. He is telling you that the parachute did not open immediately. He hit the rocks. He got cut. He bled. He starved. But eventually, the wind caught him. This philosophy shifted the trajectory of his entire career. He stopped seeing himself as just an entertainer and started seeing himself as an elevator. His job was no longer just to make people laugh, it was to lift them up. He launched the Steve and Marjorie Harvey Foundation. But this was not a tax write-off charity. It was a rescue mission. Steve specifically targeted young men from fatherless homes, boys who were exactly where he was in Cleveland, angry, lost, and voiceless. He created the mentoring camps. He brings hundreds of boys to his ranch in Georgia every year. He does not just give them money, he gives them a blueprint. There is a powerful scene that plays out at every camp. Steve stands before these boys, tough kids who have seen violence and poverty, and he tells them about the stutter. He tells them about the teacher who mocked him. He tells them about the soap in the gas station bathrooms. He breaks down the myth of instant success. He tells them, success is not a straight line. It is a jagged mess of failures that you refuse to let define you. Stutter. Central to this philosophy is his unapologetic faith. In an industry that often shies away from religion, Steve Harvey shouts it from the rooftops. He attributes 100% of his survival to God. He often says, "You can't tell my story without God. It doesn't make math sense." How does a college dropout with a speech impediment become a global media mogul? How does a homeless man become a centimillionaire? How does a man canceled by the internet rise to be more popular than ever? Steve believes his suffering was a setup. The years in the car were not a punishment. They were a preparation. God had to empty him of his ego so he could fill him with purpose. He had to be stripped of everything so he could understand the value of everything. Today, Steve Harvey operates with a sense of urgency that frightens people half his age. He is in his late 60s, a time when most men retire to play golf. But Steve is launching new shows in Africa, investing in tech companies, and expanding his brand into the Middle East. Why? Because he knows the parachute does not stay open forever. He operates on the philosophy that, to whom much is given, much is required. He is not working for money anymore. The cars, the suits, the planes, he has them. They are tools, not trophies. He is working for legacy. He wants to be the proof that it does not matter where you start. It does not matter if you are from the coal mines of West Virginia. It does not matter if you cannot speak a full sentence without stuttering. It does not matter if you have $10 in your pocket. If you have faith, and if you are willing to jump, the air will catch you. But the jump is scary. The jump hurts. And as Steve Harvey looks back on the jagged, painful, beautiful map of his life, he has one final truth to share with us. A truth about what happens after you land. Broderick. Stephen Harvey began his life with a name nobody knew, in a town the world had forgotten, with a voice he could not use. He was the boy with the stutter, the worker on the assembly line, the drifter sleeping in a freezing car, washing his face in dirty sinks, crying out to a God he was not sure was listening. And today he is a monument. But if you strip away the Emmy Awards, the mansions, the private jets, and the billions of views, what is left? Who is the man standing in the mirror when the studio lights finally go dark? He is, at his core, a fighter. A man who took the stones life threw at him and built a castle. His story is not a fairy tale. Fairy tales are about luck. Steve Harvey's story is about grit. It is about the ugly, unglamorous, painful work of refusing to die. It is about the audacity to believe that a black boy from West Virginia could one day tell the world when to laugh and when to listen. He taught us that laughter is not just a reaction, it is a weapon. It is how we survive the coal mines of our own lives. He taught us that a mistake, even a global, humiliating mistake, is not a tombstone. It is a stepping stone, and most importantly, he taught us that the dream you put in your drawer when you were 12 years old is still valid. It is still waiting for you. But it will not come to you. You have to go to it. You have to endure the silence. You have to endure the cold nights in the Ford Tempo. You have to endure the betrayal of friends and the mockery of strangers. And then you have to jump. Steve Harvey is no longer just the king of comedy. He is the king of reinvention. He is the proof that your past does not predict your future. He once said, "You are never too old to reinvent yourself." Do not wake up 65 years old and not have done the one thing you wanted to do. He did it. He jumped. And against all odds, the parachute opened. So, the next time you see him on your screen, laughing that big, infectious laugh, remember what it cost. Remember the silence before the sound. And ask yourself, what is your Ford Tempo? What is your stutter? And are you brave enough to walk onto the stage anyway? Because the only thing scarier than jumping is standing still.